This is Senate Appropriations, and we're continuing our work on the FY 2024 budget. We're starting about an hour later than we had hoped, so I hope everybody is ready for a long afternoon. And we're going to try to focus on getting everything closed out, and fortunately Joint Fiscal has been busy at work putting together spreadsheets to help us get through this process. So the first document that we will work from is the one that Stephanie has passed out.
It's a color document, it's got lots of gray on it. I'm going to explain the color coding first, and we'll, just for everyone to know, correct that if you've got a hard copy where the little new is on the front page where it says Brattleboro, that should have been changed to Bennington.
Yeah, we mentioned that yesterday, but
she did make it in my spreadsheet. So color coding, gray is where the number, the amount of money, and the item are the same in what you're proposing and what the House passed. There may be areas where the language, when we get the draft of the language, that are slightly different, but the money and the source of money and the amount of money is the same. They're the same thing. So that's what the gray represents. Pink are items where we have moved something to the base. Yellow are where we have changed something. Either we have taken the amount of money down or up for an item. Green is when we've moved something to contingent, and then the sort of light blue items are, I don't know why the hub and spoke is blue, that should have been yellow. Or where we're adding something new. That's what the blue is meant to represent.
So all three of those.
so let's go right through.
And so the very first one should have been yellow also. So my color coding is sort of falling apart right off the bat.
So that House put in 1 year. This is a requirement that we have to do. Talk to the Office of Racial Equity. They obviously feel that the full project should be funded, and we agree with them.
Yeah.
And so that's the difference between the House and Senate. This is also going to show why our spending is different than the House, because anything that is a multi-year project, we are funding, or we're not funding at all. So the language access is something that we need to do legally, and we're fully funding it. And I think we had agreed to that, even though it might not be yellow.
Will be on the next version. And the community safety grants, we were not able to find the funds to go up to 7.5 on that, so that one stayed gray. We do have language that we got from Eric to put into the bill. When Senator Shears gets a copy of the draft, he'll tell us whether or not there needs to be more than what we got from Eric.
Because he wanted to make sure that that there was no limit on the amount that we could accept from.
And so that's one of the, on the language side, to circle back on.
Okay.
You're fully funding the FEMA denial line item. And then the next several down to the treasurer's office, where we've moved that back into the base, down to the conservation district, where we moved 250 to the base. And Soteria House, you've moved to the contingent list. And then the big new ad, the first new big ad is the Bennington inpatient residential facility.
But we agreed to that yesterday, that we have to fund that psychiatric. But that's a huge difference, because there was no money in the House for that.
All the way down to the blueprint, the Green Mountain Care Board pieces are the same, the refugee pieces. I should probably put that yellow because of the $25,000 difference on the study. The $10 million for the exigent circumstances for healthcare providers, and then funding the forecasted Medicaid. Those are all stayed the same. What should have been yellow is the blueprint, where you have actually funded the full 2 years. The next yellow one below the blueprint is recovery housing. And
that was the one time, and I know Senator Westman had discussion, and This would be, the desire was to have money to fund staff, and that's an ongoing base expenditure. So
So we've got a draft of language that probably needs some wordsmithing when you get the draft that requires the agency, ODAP essentially, to review the structure and the funding model and come back with recommendations.
And this is an example where grants got started and programs got started and now obviously the funding is coming back, but it's hard to piece it. So we'll look at the language when we get it, but we obviously don't have the money to be doing everything that was requested.
I do have you funding the $30,000 for the first month rent vouchers and the recovery housing world. Not funding the specified criminal justice reform case management project. The money for the coalitions, the nearly $1.6 million. The tobacco cessation is moved from the general fund to the tobacco fund because we do have the revenues in that fund to support that.
Seems awful small. I just have to say. The highest cause of death in the state.
Pick up,
There is a base amount.
This is all, okay.
This is the one, this is one time.
One time. Okay.
The EMS study remains in, it's the different language that you'll see when you see the draft that we looked at earlier. Yesterday you made a decision to put Jenna's promise into the one time, and so the base money for the recovery centers will stay as just for the recovery centers.
not void aid.
The reach ahead pilots, that is no change, but you'll see the language difference. And then we moved into the base, the youth stipends, which is $1 million, so $500,000 moved to the base. So those are covered going forward. Then the next new one is the 211, $650,000 general fund. There may be other federal funds that go with this, but a requirement to come back to joint fiscal in the fall to give you status on how that program is progressing in terms of being.
Well, certainly it'll get us through to the BAA, and we've got knowing what the other funding sources look like. That's something also got new, that came in just like within the last week or so. But that's to continue our 24/7 emergency coverage as well.
So you have the driver's ed vehicle in DCF, and then you have the two housing. These are the one-time pieces of housing in DCF. In GA, the 18 million, which is in combination with the 7.5 that's now in the base. And then you have the 2.5 of HOP grants. There's base money for the HOP grants as well as expanding shelter capacity as well in the base. This should have been yellow, the food bank should have been yellow, if you're increasing to $3 million. And you're not funding the sales force rollout for CIS. The diaper bank through the PCC, so that's in the DCF CDD line. And then you're not funding the Child Abuse Vermont. The breast milk would run through a DCF grant out to the Milk Donor Center. That was, we didn't define the actual dollar amount, so this one actually, I would like you to say if you want to do this, first of all, and if 50,000, we've done $30,000 in the past. So that is a made up number for me, because I didn't have an actual ask. No one could find the request, the dollar amount of the request.
And you said it was 30, that's what we
A
did.
couple of years ago, it was $30,000.
We're a little shy on one-time money, so committee, we obviously this is something that we can refine when we get in with the House. We want to put it in as the 30 or the 50. Doesn't matter. Let's go with an even 50 and come back and we can refine it.
No change to the early ed leadership, but Mentor Vermont now, you see $1 million here in one time. And we have taken the money out of the base and the language directing to find, to see how this fits in with the multiple funding sources that are out there for cannabis and opioid.
And we have that language somewhere.
You'll see it in the drafts. The next DOL and Resources Board, no change. The Governor's Institute, you move to the base. The School Construction Task Force funding is now in the list. Then you see several that have no change. Symphony, the Land Access and Opportunity Board, that does have an amendment that goes with it. The language, yes. The no changes to the special fund pieces in Public Service Department. The change at the Vermont Access Network is not a change in money, but a change in location to the Secretary of State. So that one should have been gray, actually. And the Green Mountain Transit actually should have been yellow.
Doesn't need to be done.
It doesn't need to be done. You're funding the full 10 million for the state network through ADS, but there was not funding to do the 2.5 million for modernization. And you are funding the network for the judiciary. And then you have a handful of new things that should be familiar. Funding the request for the 250th commission, the Vermont 250th commission. The St. Joseph's Orphanage Survivor Monument, that's through the Crime Victim Services. And then the newest piece this morning, I don't know if everyone's aware of, is the $10,000 item for the Intercollegiate Sexual Harm Prevention Council to continue, to allow that council to continue to work. The pilot funding for SASH, which is $450,000 gross through global commitment. And then the VPIC asset study and the Vermont Saves at the Treasurer's Office. That makes up in this 1100 section, the one times. And I'll get the color coding straight eventually.
Any comments? Yeah.
The SASH funding, is that different than like, or that's just what, this was the request and that's what
Well,
we're funding?
SASH, they
Was there
had
two
two, they would really, they're basically wanted to continue the bridge for the 2 year, the two pilots. But if we had the money, they would like to have 2.7 million
And expand.
to expand.
So
We don't have the money to fund an expansion, but we are providing the, for the
Continuing the pilot
sites.
sites. The next section on the third page, this
And you can see all of those, there's nothing in the house for them.
right, all those new ones that we,
Yeah.
So I tried to note with that little new on the side, it was new to the whole, that the house did not have it at all. So the workforce section, this is reflecting conversations after the presentation on what was recommended by the Senate Economic Development Committee. And so the gray areas are where there's no change either from the House or really from Senate Economic Development Committee, with the exception of upskilling, where because the $500,000 was needed for the professional development in DOC, and the recommendation to actually not fund the Office of Engagement piece, but maintain the funding for the upskilling. That's what's reflected here, along with not funding several of the new programs.
Now, just a reminder, the DOC, we got, those of us on joint fiscal got a notice that they had a very sizable grant for leadership and training and staff development. I think it was over I'm trying to find the, what came from.
Thought it was 500,000.
Well, I think 500 or 600, maybe 580, I'm not sure, but it was a very significant amount of money that would do exactly this. So fortunately, we had the federal money, and we are not recommending that we fund what was added here.
Yeah, there is a note from the Judiciary Committee that Stephanie and that Ben Novogowski sent to Stephanie and myself. We went over these.
I think that still had the general fund in it, and so what you had decided in this committee was to fund it with, because the grant is there, that the general fund would be freed up.
Yeah, right.
Which was fortuitous on our part. So it's one area that we gained something as opposed to an additional cost that we had to accommodate.
Yep.
So you will see on the UVM Office of Engagement, and then we had some discussion about the upskilling, and I think Senator Ruth, you had talked about your preference was to fund the upskilling, not the, now, that would be a departure from what was recommended from economic development. I did let the vice chair know that we had had some discussion, and I guess it might end up being something we have to discuss in the conference. But at this point, this would defer to use the money for the upskilling. Or I guess it's upskilling scholarships, which is the 3 million. So that's how, I'm sorry, Stephanie, I'm getting ahead, but I just wanted to let people know that there was some change between, and we asked them for their recommendations, but I did review this with the vice chair this morning. So I think everybody knows recommendations are recommendations, but ultimately we try to weigh them out and look at how that fits with what the House is proposing and see how to make that work. So, so if you want to go on, Stephanie, I may have got you out.
That's okay. So
So we were on
the server and learn is at the Senate Economic Committee, Senate Economic Development Committee's recommended level. The VSAC, the Advanced Vermont Climate Workforce, and the Vermont Sustainable Jobs Fund Business Coaching. The Senate committee recommended funding those, but your tightness in terms of coming back into balance.
we said new programs were the first to have to be taken off.
And then that brings us down below the Office of Engagement to Restorative Justice, and that's at the level, and the state colleges are fine with that level of funding from the Senate Economic Development Committee. There's no change to this, the 3D certificate program, the critical occupations. The upskilling is the same level as the House, but it is different from the committee as we just discussed down the hall. The Advanced Vermont Credential of Value would stay the same. The psychiatric mental health nurse forgivable loan program, as well as the EMS training, the healthcare workforce limited service position, the $3 million DA training. You will see a change in language when you get the draft on that one.
And
the
that has
dollar
to do with
amount
the
stays-
administration, not the amount.
The Vermont training program for the CHIPS Act stays the same. The small business technical assistance stays the same. It does not
We did
create
not
that new
create
program.
that
It's
exchange.
the RDCs, just have the money and provide the technical assistance. The Arts Council is the same. The Rural Industry Development Grant Program, this should be green. This is one in order to come into balance. It's funded at the second position right now in the contingent list. So it is not funded in the money, but it would be high on the contingent list.
Which will go with the,
So the program, a high probability of being funded and starting.
Which one is that again?
The Rural Industry Development Grant
that's the one where
Program.
they could actually acquire property anticipating further trade,
for the-
particularly with the
right,
Canadian
For
companies.
Yeah,
the
okay.
development course.
Yeah.
Brownfields was the same on both sides. Reach ahead, reach ahead support services. We talked about this at the end of the day yesterday. And this is one that goes together with the relocating workers that was recommended.
And I,
by the committee.
and I did discuss that with the vice chair this morning. I want to link this back. There's a 2-year proposal pilot to support reach out parents to go to work and not be dependent on public assistance. And in thinking about that, and Senator Westman talked about, in order to support their entry into work, there are costs, transportation, maybe a vehicle, clothing. I mean, you think about the things that it takes. And so so I had said, we ought to look at how we encourage Vermonters who are outside the workforce and support them to, enter the workforce, not just simply look at how do we bring other people into the state. So I did review with her and to say, it seems to make sense to increase the level of support services to go with that pilot, which is all about getting parents ready and exiting from public assistance. And if we're lucky in terms of the work of that pilot, and I do have a lot of information because we had discussion about the design and when incentives go out and experience, that if we are able to make reductions in the caseload and more parents are able to support families and not require the assistance, then that would, we would hope, free up money that we could then consider to address the basic benefits that we provide through the Reach Up program. So that's new. It was a kind of a continuation of the discussion we had yesterday afternoon, but it seemed to be a nice alignment with that pilot. And hopefully we will see some positive return, and everybody understands, I think, in this labor market, the opportunities for employment, combined with hopefully what we would hope would be a more robust childcare program, would really make a big difference in the lives of these working families. So that's what that does.
What about the drop off or the cliff there? Are we trying to, if we held that where it was and then ratcheted
It does already.
very slowly?
No, it's already set up to be a slope.
A slow
Yes.
slope?
And not only that, the way in which we've done our childcare and our subsidy, also, the impact is not only on the Reach Up benefit, but it's also the relationship with other benefits, like food stamps. So for every $3 more you earn, it's a $1 reduction. So, and childcare, certainly with what we passed, would move from 150% of federal poverty up to 185, full subsidy. You pay nothing for your childcare. And then it is a much more robust and slopes down. So I think we are trying to be much more sensitive. $1 more puts you, with a very substantial loss. So it seemed to us that we have a group of Vermonters outside the workforce that we need to support as much as and incentives to bring people here.
But this is also moving toward the workforce, right? Which has added to that I think in these times when we just lost something that is food, with the insecurity in housing, all of that this is an area that gives flexibility.
Yes, it does. So that's where we come. Are people comfortable? Yes, Andy.
I would just for all the reasons you say, those last two numbers, that I would reverse them. I know that there's other reasons why we're not doing that, but the money for the Reach Up seems to be worthy of the larger number versus the relocating of the workers.
I would go even further. I would, if it were up to me, I would zero out that last number, put all the money to previous. And I know that the relocating workers number here is smaller than it was, and has gotten smaller from 4 to 2 to 1.5, but I have never liked that program ever since it came into being. I've never understood people's enthusiasm of that.
And right now,
I
that's
got a great free advertising from it when it was first announced, but I'm not sure. So, but Senator Lyons,
We'll have a conversation.
as you know, the House has no funding for it. And we do hear that oftentimes the issue isn't getting workers who want to come to Vermont and fill jobs. They can't find a place to live. So maybe we're creating an incentive where we don't need to incent, but if there's a group that we do need to support their entry, and it's the people that are really very, very low income. I would suspect anybody moving in under remote is not at the level of our Reach Up family. Senator Sears.
Yeah, I was personally disappointed that we were only able to fund the community violence grants at $5 million. And I look at you know, we had to do the blueprint. I fully support that, and the program for psychiatric program for youth. So I understood why. But when I come over here and look at some of these priorities, I'm with other members of the committee. I just am, you know, we've got a housing crisis coming, and we're asking for people to come here, and that's great. I love to have people come here to Vermont, but paying them and using this money for that purpose. I'm with Senator Baruth and others who have spoken that maybe this is time to move away from that.
I should only tell you that we've already brought down what was recommended. I know that people have very strong feelings. Other people have a great deal of support. As you can see, the governor money, and the House did not put in any. This is putting in with a much more modest amount, which if we agree with this support to reach out families, makes a difference.
And I would say in support services, there is in base funding in the bottom line embedded within the budget, there is a little over $1.1 million for support services. So this is in addition to that, and I think it's in addition in recognition of the fact that we're very rich.
So the question, it doesn't seem, everybody seems to support putting more money toward these families to reach up. The question becomes one of the extent to which we want to, we've already gone in and said we're not supporting the new programs, the 1.5. And I have, the question is, do we want to reduce relocating workers more? And or
it would, if it were to go to 1 million and the reach up was to go to 1 million, that would strike me as a better outcome.
I think that'd be good. I think that would be good.
all right,
I'm good with that.
okay, all right.
Can we?
We will update that.
Yeah, we'll change the split and do.
Workers we get from each group, if we're gonna equalize the money, so we get an idea in another year. Is it better to fund our own to get them to work or go get new people?
Well, you know, that's why I think, and I'm glad to see that on here, it's something that we've supported in this committee for a number of years, and that's the Vermont Serve, Learn, and Earn. And some of those participants are referred by vocational. And they are, they're youth or sometimes adults. So to me, that is a program that's really trying to invest with potential entry into the workforce, but not necessarily are going to be coming in as accountants, physicians, and whatever. And so I think we have to recognize that we have some human capital right here in the state and how we develop that potential. And to me, that's one program. And I think what we're trying to do in Reach Up is another. Obviously, VR, which is hireability, is another program with that goal as well. And then, of course, this ties back to childcare, and the other part is, you know, the healthcare. So I just realized that Commissioner Diva wanted to talk to me about premium assistance. Well, okay. I don't have enough hours in the day. I'm going to close this out then. We'll change the million to a million. And now we're down to ag.
And ag is the same exact as we talked about yesterday. The only change is that the working lands was part of the Senate Economic Development Target, but we've put it under the agricultural subheading now. It's the same amount of money. It's a gray one. It's no change.
You just
But we're just
located.
you know, subtotaling it with the total of ag
I thought you were giving me a bigger box.
No, we're just adding to your box.
So now, on the last page, maybe we should do climate first, and then we have to come back and actually, the very bottom, you can see the pension pluses moved to the base. There's a couple of small pieces of special funds that have moved to the base, or federal funds that moved to the base in climate. And the main change in the climate, everything's the same except for what you see as the share program and the clean heat homes program. So we're not funding that program. It has the 8.5 of federal congressionally directed spending. But the share program through the Public Service Department would be at $2 million.
At the 3 on clean heat will go down to 2 and go to the Public Service Department for the share program. Okay. And I made Senator Burchett happy because I thought I told him he only had one. Now you got 2, twice as
So
much.
the yellow.
Yes,
Sure.
Senator.
This is a
This
question.
blue one,
Yeah.
blue one is 2.
Maybe for the chair of Senate Ag. So on the crop damage payment, I understand we're not making a change there, but we had discussion about the statute being changed.
Yeah, they were working on
And
that.
I was wondering, did that ever happen?
Not yet, but we were hopefully gonna do a cap on
Yes,
that.
Cap on the payment.
Like training or something.
Because I think that's better than the way it is now, but
You just open it.
it's
We can
Oh,
check.
hard for me to
so-
understand why the state should be, at this point, why the state should be in the business of.
And does anyone know if it's a drafting
Well,
request
Like
for that?
your
It's not
dog,
like
having
review
all the
saying.
candies and
Well, the question of, do you have draft language?
Michael does.
The question is, do
Were you
we
taking here?
want to consider adding the language that would put a limit on the amount of payment that the state would pay for damages to go with this money?
I think that would be a good idea.
All right, if we
We
could,
need that
We
for
can send it over
Saturday.
to Michael Brady.
yeah.
He was gonna have to leave early for a kid thing, but we can get it from him.
okay, all right, if we could.
Senator Brooke, I think we
Don't
have
need
to-
a- don't need a call.
I'll send him an
We
email.
spent a lot of time on hashing this around.
Well, so you're ready to put the language in? There's agreement?
I think we're ready to put the language.
All right, we just need to get it.
You want me to step out and give my jingle?
Well,
Sarah's sending him a note right now.
Oh,
you don't have to do it. Okay, so the big change that we made was obviously
Sure.
moving the 3, 2 over to share. And remember, that's to help our schools that have these, particularly wood chip heat generating systems that aren't in utilization, aren't in use because they need repair. And Shayla, do you want to come in and give us your
There's nothing left for you to sell back.
Did you need something from
Here, Shayla. I don't know, it was something around,
Yes, we have some language I'd like to check. Can we send it to you?
send it to Sarah. I guess I need to tell people, first of all, we had some discussion yesterday, and unless we're on our computers looking at something other than the sheets, none of us are getting emails during the course of today. And the other thing that some members mentioned is people are attempting to text them while they're here at the table. And that is, we're not going to answer the text, and we're going to do our work, because we can't be multitasking and any more than we would be allowing someone who's sitting in the room to come and start talking to us. So my only point is, if you want something, then put it through the sergeant at arms, have it brought here to us manually. Do not rely on emails and do not text us, is what I'm asking. Because I was not aware, you can see I don't pay much attention to my phone, so it doesn't matter, but other people had talked about the fact that they were getting communications from other than the committee itself or staff. So I just want to mention that as sort of a consideration, please, as we move through this. So we'll get the language and as it relates to crop damage. Any other comments on this page?
Where were you throwing the wood boiler?
That's already in the
That's
share.
their-
That's the share, and we've done it. It's just,
Oh,
we have to
it's
reduce
okay.
it from 3 to
Expands.
2.
Help, 2 million.
Yeah. And
That's good.
we still have, and that, as I say, those are markets for the low-grade wood.
Yeah.
And they're investments many times that we paid to support the installation, and now we're not even getting the benefit from them. So it seemed like a good opportunity to get those systems back operational. So, okay, anything
Should put
else?
that whole program.
So now we just need to go back up to affordable housing on this sheet. And because all the imbalance was against what was available, against the house's position, I will tell you that you have basically $60 million to spend on affordable housing. The $500,000 of municipal bylaw modernization is not in it. We have language that says use, direct planning money, the 1.5 of additional planning money that is through the property transfer tax, to have at least $500,000 of that used for the bylaw modernization if needed. So there's an alternate source for that. But just letting you know, in terms of balance, that's how much you ended up with in terms of available for the housing.
And so, also, I just want to go back, because we do have housing in a variety of ways. We put 7.5, and I know that we're getting emails, and I would be remiss if I didn't bring it to the attention of the committee. And that is that housing advocates have asked, and I've made reference to continue our motel program. Originally, that request was for 77 million. Now, we do have emergency housing that we provide through the GA program. The motel program that we set up was in response to the public emergency at the very beginning of COVID. And there is a desire to continue that to operate. And obviously, there are people that are getting housed in the motels. We've paid over 200 million so far. And so in the GA program, there's 7.5 million. There's also 18 million of the one-time money that would go with it. We also have the money for HOP, which is helping to keep people and pay back rent. And that's got several pots of money, including the 500,000 we put in the BAA. I believe there's 200, is there 2 million here?
There's you have 2.5 that you did in 1100. I believe then there's 2 million in the base on top that was added by the house. Is that correct?
So we've got,
And then there's
so as we look at how we respond to housing, and then the other part, and that is that within the GA program, there is, and I don't want to put it out as it should become the norm, but if there is in fact something that's life-threatening, and that the department has the ability to make exceptions to address those emergency situations. But I want the committee to know that there is still a desire to continue funding the motel program. And
So what extent?
well, originally it was part of the Oregon project, and that was house everybody until we got more of units brought online. Now, we've been bringing units online over the period of time because, and then there's also the VHIP program that's designed to bring housing units, get them rehabbed and online more quickly as well. So housing has been kind of a multi-strategy, but there is emergency housing. It's in a very different context than it was provided during the public health emergency. There's no question about that. And so we have, I have, and we'll be getting testimony, or which will go online from in this case, Brenda Siegel, who is an advocate for housing, and it's basically saying that it is a matter of threat to life if we don't fund the program as we know it now. And so we had a lot of discussion earlier when we did the BAA, and we came to a different definition of vulnerable as of July 1st, and we would go back to the GA program as it existed pretty much before the pandemic and emergency housing. Now, the other thing I would bring up is, remember in the BAA, we added 2.5 million specifically to BHCB to start bringing units online, particularly the conversions of motels. But what we found is the sales cost of motels has gone up because the generation of money through emergency housing has, if you look at the value based on the income that they generate, as long as this state program operates, has really accelerated the cost. So I do want to bring this out. We've tried to strike what's the right balance. We know that, in some cases, there may be people will make choices. They might have to go with family members or whatever. But we do have in the budget, within the context of GA, about $28 million. And then we've got more money that we want to put into developing housing, because we know that the solution to this is we've got to increase our housing capacity. And so we had 25 million for VHCB in the budget adjustment, in addition to the 2.5 that we added. And so now the question is, with the money that we still have available, how we want to allocate that money. There's been some discussion about taking a specific amount of money to go with the 2.5, but in fact, the funding to VHCB also would allow the flexibility to really bring on more emergency shelter and permanent housing. Now, we've had meetings with VHCB in terms of the work ahead. The hope is, with the changes made in S100, the siting and the development of this housing will be 3 more expeditious. So what we have is a desire to take the permanent of the emergency and the permanent homes for homelessness and make sure that we are putting in support teams. Because one of the things that has been talked about is not only do you find housing, but in order for individuals to maintain their housing, they need to have support services, and that's kind of the housing first model in a different context. So I would just want to raise that, because I don't want anyone to think that I did not bring this up for discussion and what is the right balance. And right now, the balance is the 28 plus what we have for the HOP grants, which can help pay for bag rent so you don't lose housing.
That's 4 million in the hub? Two pots of 2 million?
Yeah, it's more than that. With 5, it's probably close to 4.5, 5 million. And if we're helping reach out families a bit more, then so I just want to say that what we have here is funding that's going into the housing need and demand in a variety of strategies. I know that the house pad is something that would allow trailers, and but we've got testimony saying you may have a vacant lot, and one park had 10 vacant lots. But the reason they were vacant was because the water supply was not adequate. So, or you might have a vacant lot that is very, in a town that is very remote, or kids, it just doesn't make sense. So the folks at VHCB wanted to really allow multiple strategies that they could use.
I wonder who administers this program for the motels and, if, like, when I had drivers on the road and I was gonna stay at the same hotel or motel every week, I got a different rate than if they just drove in and then walked up.
Who sent me this?
I think there should be a monthly rate, not a daily rate, because I've heard that some of these motels are getting a daily rate or,
The average is $147 a night.
well, that's the daily rate if you or I or whoever drives in, but if you're gonna rent 10 rooms for a month,
Well, they spent even more than that. They did some negotiation of rates. So, and the other, thing which we've gotten is sometimes the quality of the rooms. And not to say that they all are, but some in fact are. People are concerned about the health and the conditions of the room. So it's a mixed bag. On the other hand, it was an expedient response when we had a public health emergency. So I'm gonna go back, Andy.
I thought another one thing that I thought was good that we did in the VA was that I think they called the crisis team. Do you remember what that dollar amount was, and do we know if those people were able to be hired?
Yeah, to support the teams. And the other thing, we really, I don't know whether we have some language, we talked about it, and that is our Medicaid program has got a waiver so that we can do more to use Medicaid dollars to provide those support services. And that's the longer term plan.
They were gonna hire more people, but we weren't sure they were gonna be able to. But I don't know if, at least in my mind at the time, it's like by the time we got to June or July, we'd have more of those people on the ground that could help.
And also the teams were,
In theory, that was the goal. I
That
don't
is
know.
the goal.
well, the other thing is those teams were composed of workers from a variety of programs. The parent-child centers oftentimes were on the team, VR, DCF, family services, maybe some of the community-based organizations. So the teams were.
Because I share the concern about the kind of, the amount of people that are put on the street all at once and the impact that'll have on these teams and people providing services.
Well, that's
You know
why
what,
when we.
here's the reality. The reality is that the Agency of Human Services isn't gonna allow people who have needs and support services, whether they're disabled or whatever
Children.
else. They're not gonna send it out on the street. They are going to be looking to find support for them and a place for them. So, and through the general assistance program. So it is a concern because it would be nice to predict a place that you're going to live permanently. That's the problem.
Yeah.
And we all agree with that. So it's this short little transition time that is so problematic. So what Vermont has done in terms of purchasing hotels is huge, but we're not far behind
Yeah.
Oregon, are we?
No, we purchased
Per capita, we're
Per
better.
capita,
Well, I
Oh,
would
much,
say
much
we're
better.
way better.
Yeah.
We're 5 times
so
bigger.
it's, and I am probably, I am very aware, very sympathetic, and I understand the requests that we're getting. It would be great if we were 2 years back and putting this in place. We're not there right now. We have money that we can invest through VHCD and others. VHCD is very aware of what the critical needs are, who needs them, where they need them. So, yeah, it feels really uncomfortable. I agree with you. I don't want, I'd feel terrible if we thought 1,000 people were gonna be put out on the street. But I don't think that's reality. So, you know,
And I
I
don't,
think,
we did do something, and I'm not proposing it here, but a while back, we actually gave people a stipend because it was research that showed that you give the people some money, and I don't remember what the benefit was. And
It was substantial, so $3,500.
yeah, something like that, people can be, if, with some money, can actually be resourceful and perhaps be come up with a problem, answer to their problem in a way that the state government can. But we have to allocate what we have. And so right now, Stephanie, we have,
So you have the bylaw modernization covered by another means.
okay, all right. And
And when you took the testimony from Commissioner Hanford on the land value tax feasibility study, this committee didn't seem to have an appetite for it.
no,
Wait and see what the Burlington experience
I think we
Are
were
they
kind of,
turns out. So,
Burlington is good.
well, it was sort of like if you own blighted property and should we?
The Elmwood, are you talking about the Elmwood parking place?
No, the
No,
land value,
Oh, land value.
Oh,
changing that.
So the question is, should we
I
wait?
like the
I think we should see how it, the Burlington, and then decide. The question then is if we take out the bylaws, because that's being funded, and say the tax feasibility right now in light of the housing and the policies that's going in, that would leave us with a full full amount of around 60 million. We have VHIP program changes. There's 10 million for VHIP.
there's the 10 million for VHIP, we did 5 in the budget adjustment. This is, the 10 million is a little bit less than what the governor had requested, he requested 15. But the 10 is what the House did.
And the experiences that has brought units on very quickly, simply because they're just taking existing housing and getting them up to standard. So it seems like it's a strategy and bringing units online very expeditiously, that this is one that's proven itself. The next one is BHCB on top of what we did in the BAA.
Yes.
And don't forget, at the time we did it in the BAA, there was still 43 million that VHCB had not allocated out. So they had 43 million plus the 25, plus the 2.5 that we added. And now this would be on top of those funding.
And I would assume part of their base would also go towards.
Yes, and
housing.
that's, yes, and then the base of, what is it, 27 million is their base? 21. So yes, on top, and that, of course, that does cover conservation as well.
Right, so that's split, so
But
it's
never
about half
less,
of that.
yeah. So if we were to say, if we do the VHIP, then we've got just about 50
That you would have the
50 million. And the question would be, do we want to, we had some, as sort of an outcome of our meeting, is to take what we had and allocate a portion to supporting more motel conversions, which might in fact occur, and there might be a market out in the summer. Some of them are in not such great shape and probably can be rehabbed, and some of them don't have, they're just single rooms and not equipped with kitchens or whatever. So to rehab some of them.
That ones that the state owns.
Well, no,
No.
that VHCB would work to buy, like the Home Motel and like they did on Route 302 on the Barry Montpelier Road. So if we had a total of 50, we could do, we could allocate 10 million.
It wouldn't just be for the hotel, it'd be the manufactured housing infill, other supported housing.
And then the other, we would not direct, but in fact could be used to expand the development of these units as well.
permanent.
Yeah. So we were given some draft language.
Yeah, that was, the draft language had assumed the House floor amendment extra 10 was in. So the draft language had also assigned a percentage out of the remaining 40 million. But I don't think you want to do that since you don't have that extra $10 million that the floor amendment on the House side took away from childcare.
No, we don't have it. But we do have a total of
50, yep.
Okay.
Just you could do the 10 and the 40 without specifying any more out of the 40. It would just be for the whole array of affordable housing.
Yes, Andy, you had a question?
So I guess I'm just getting the number. It would be 50, we have 60 total, so it would be the 10 and the 50.
You have 50 total to go
We're on
to
50,
VHCB.
so- okay.
Yes. You have 10 to go.
The
Um,
VHAB.
And then the language you have that breaks down what DHCD would do with this for the 50.
Is for the 50. It would be 10 for the hotel motel buying, the infill at mobile home sites, other supported housing, and then 40 for the just broad range of affordable housing development.
But out of that 40, there's freedom to use it to
Sure.
augment the
Sure.
10. We're just,
Depending
One
on
of the
what-
opportunities that the board finds.
Right, or that under them.
Yes. So that would, the only other amendment that I have around housing is, last year you put $4 million into manufactured housing, and Commissioner Hanford had said that the bill that had specified so much for 3 different areas. They have higher demand in one area than the other 2, and he was asking for an amendment that is drafted
money to be shifted.
to allow money to be shifted. He's got 2 versions. If you're inclined to do the amendment, choose the version. One is a simple, the short side of the sheet would allow him to reapportion up to 50% of the funds from in subdivision 1 through the other sections. Or what you see in the amendment on the first page is simply striking the actual allocations, just saying 4 million shall be used for these 3 things. Either way gets him the
I
flexibility
would like
he
to
needs.
give him the flexibility. I think for us to predict is already proven to be problematic,
So
so.
we would do the longer amendment, just,
Yeah.
we would specify the 4 million and not have any dollar amounts for the individual pieces.
No, I mean, we can allocate them based on.
He's good.
How much did you say we had been spent?
I can't remember the amount, but one of them is completely exhausted in terms of the limits exist now.
Yeah.
So
I don't know.
this is another housing.
I don't know if it's the middle one where you have help for the other foundation grants. I think it's one of those. And then it's sounding like we don't have it in at the draft right now, but you want a little bit of directive about sort of maximizing the Medicaid waiver in terms of supported housing.
Yeah.
So we'll try to have something crafted. That basically shuts down all the money. And
I would just have to say, I think not doing anything in missing middle rental.
Oh, no, wait a minute.
Okay.
We haven't forgotten that. Center Westman.
Or missing any of the missing middle houses.
Well,
Would be a mistake.
well, don't forget, we added 9 million in the BAA for the missing middle water.
On the
Well,
houses.
yes, so.
But I think on the rental side.
So, yes, well, you need to get to our next construct. We
Okay,
have not forgotten,
I'm just
we haven't
telling you.
gotten the St. Albans garage to the
I'm just
missing
saying.
middle rental.
So the 4 items that I'm aware of for the contingent list. So this would not be an actual appropriation unless surplus money flowed into the cash fund at the end of the year. Are the St. Albans garage is $3.5 million. The construct to make the money balance that moved the rural industry at $5 million in the contingent list, then
500.
5 million.
That's usually, okay, $500.
$5 million. And then $10 million for the VHFA missing middle rental program. And then the last piece would be the Soteria House piece. If there's money available, then it'd be $1 million for the purchase of a new facility.
Which would come with the usual conditions around state, protecting the state investment.
So that was the order on the list?
That would be the order on the list.
Well, that's right now.
Right now is our,
Committee needs to
Why
weigh
and
in,
that would be a list that would be just under $20 million.
and we think that that can be, yeah. uh-huh.
Yeah, I don't know if you folks in transportation discussed this stuff. right now is probably the poorest time anybody could build anything. Public land's expensive, building materials expensive, contractors are all busy, and you usually try to keep state building or municipal building. You try to promote that when the economy goes into the sewer to keep all those people busy. And I think if you haven't discussed that, we ought to talk.
Well, we have talked about that a lot, but the unfortunate thing about the federal money is it has to be spent by 2026. So,
We're obligated.
well,
We're not, and it's a lot of roads and bridges that just need to
Yeah.
be maintained.
No, the garage is what I'm,
Oh, the
Um,
garage.
well, that is a priority for the committee.
well, I have personal priorities, but sometimes they get a little bit left behind when.
Well, I guess then the committee needs to make a decision, but that was that was proposed to be used, funded, and that was to put general fund into the transportation fund. We do not support funding it in that particular way. So it was put on the list out of this because the governor's proposal was to fund it. I think that was out of the capital bill. So this is just using that same funding structure as was recommended by the administration. Senator Western.
Can you just run through the list and where they, in the construct? Part of my worry is if you're going to have any effect on a construction season this year, having to wait till the end of the year to see if money's available and start anything in putting this in order, that means none of this money is gonna go out to a construction season a year from now.
Well,
So the governor
we haven't changed the.
The governor had it effective on July 1.
But it's in the budget, you know it's going to happen, and
But-
people begin to
But
build the
But it
boat.
doesn't, it would, the preparatory work, I don't think would necessarily be slowed down unless you started to see something like a dramatic drop off of tax revenues in June.
I'm just asking how hot, what was the listing?
So it was 3.5, so $8.5 million.
Now you can put the missing middle ahead of
The
the
industry.
If that's, you want to change the order, that's
I'd
fine.
like to change the order.
All right, so we would put put it.
I think it's very, very important.
Well, I don't think it'll be a matter of either or, so I'm agnostic in terms of the order. I just know that, this bill is going to carry, the fee increase for transportation, and so there's an interplay between what we're doing here and the transportation bill. If you want to switch, we were recommending, because that was something that was a priority that came out of the Senate Transportation, that with that difference this year of the fee increase, that made sense, and then we can move the rental up to number 2, and then we can put the, which is a totally new initiative.
I know it's a totally new.
And if there's not, I did get feedback from our economic development vice chair, and that would be an area, if the money isn't as great, then so be it. So changing the order would take care of that.
So
Yes, and
the other 3 million that we had in transportation that we had to deal with, that's gonna be dealt
Memorial
with.
Valley.
That's dealt with somewhere else. I see.
It's not on the list. I didn't have that on the list, on so it's not funded in the budget.
The House did not fund it, they just pulled it out. Well, we'll have to consider, and that can be matched, but that would take money from something else out of the T bill.
So
So the question becomes, one of how much you want to fund, do we want to put that back on the list?
the rail trail?
Yeah.
Well, the rail trail could generate some money This other stuff's only gonna cost you money.
Well, why don't we?
But the garage is gonna save.
Oh, yeah.
And this is will add work.
It's like going out and you building a brand new house.
If we
other
do
than
less
living in
on,
one area.
on the acquisition of industrial park, that will give us some money to
Get
put
real.
into a rail trail.
So if we just need to add what?
Scalability and that $3 million number too.
So why don't we do that, take it, $1 million?
And put it after the industry?
Yeah.
Okay. We can do that. So you're not done at all. Grady got some stacks of words, that we will want you to look at.
But in terms of the money,
But in terms of the money, it feels very, I mean, you may find things as you're reading, because some of the pieces might not be.
I missed, since I was trying to listen to Senator Starr's comments, Terry, that you putting $1 million to the rail trail grants in on the contingency list.
we're adding that and we're reducing the amount to acquire land for industrial development parks, which is a new initiative.
Okay.
But you're not necessarily matching it, it sounds like.
Matching.
It's subject to match, with federal dollars. So if we totally,
Where
commit-
appropriate.
but then we would have to go in and adjust something in the T fund because those federal dollars,
So, yeah,
unless, are there more federal dollars that could be drawn down?
There's sort of two separate issues. One, their larger scale projects could be matchable with future federal allocations, but the smaller scale projects, the agency would not recommend federalizing them. So this general fund money could be used towards some of those smaller scale projects this year.
Which is.
Trailheads, things like that, $100,000 projects.
So why don't we,
Take it just as pure
uh-huh.
GF in that position on the contingency. Okay,
Quick question. So the environmental justice positions, those are all funded, they're all funded. They're based.
your base.
Senator Sears, are you?
I'm just trying to follow the conversation, and this one's been difficult. What is it we're deciding? That's all I'm asking.
What we're doing is we're now moving over to what we have to be, the capital, the cash fund, which some of us have given a variety of names to. And we believe that there will be, based on revenues that are coming in today, the ability to do, like we have done in the past, some contingent appropriations.
Sounds good.
And that's what we're, is identifying those areas, starting with, the garage, a missing middle rental. Then we would move to Lamoille Valley and then to the, acquisition of industrial park, supports sites for the potential of particularly Canadian companies coming into the state and wanting to establish a site or presence here.
And the last thing would be the Superior House.
Is the women's prison in the capital bill?
Yes, that's where that would be.
If it needs more money to get it going quicker, I would use that part as a contingent too.
Well, I don't know if they do, and don't forget they have a 2-year budget there, so they have some flexibility, I suppose.
Okay, but
To advance money. from-
I think as we get to the capital bill, we should make sure that that becomes a priority to get it up and run the new facility as soon as possible. And I'm, all this discussion about housing, and I totally agree with the discussion, but I'm really worried about that prison and
Okay.
its functionality for the next 5 years.
The other thing I was thinking, institutions, I believe you said wants to sell an airport.
No,
Transportation.
transportation.
Well, okay, one of them is state-owned land. Well, an airport would make a wonderful spot for industrial development, and that's up in the Northeast Kingdom where we could use a little development. I think maybe we ought to keep that and develop it for, if it isn't gonna be an airport,
The
develop it.
potential buyer wants to develop it.
As an
economic-
Airbnb.
As a economic development. They will build new buildings and
The entity that's interested is Beta Technologies. You visited that in Burlington.
Huge.
What's the matter
He
with
loves
it?
it, he loves it.
Don't like.
No, the airport would remain a public access
would.
airport, yeah, in perpetuity, we put
A
it,
purpose, a public use airport.
so you could still learn to
You can
fly.
have your cake and eat it too, because there'll be industrial development
If I
as well.
do go for flying lessons.
It's not the Janice Peasley Airport.
No, that,
No.
Janice has a bridge.
Oh.
Not one at the airport.
Yeah.
I've got a bench made by corrections.
Well, that's better than most of those. I don't have any, just sore hands.
Everybody on.
Refrigerator.
So can I force you to read, so we don't keep this
Can I
secretary
ask one
here?
more question?
Yeah, all right.
What did we do with the $500,000 for the municipal bylaw modification?
That's
And
gonna
we funded it through another mechanism.
Okay.
increase the property transfer tax money that is going to planning, and you're gonna fund it out of that.
Thank you. We didn't forget it. We just
Okay.
moved it around. All right, now we have a stack of,
And the PDF should be posted now.
This is the
And
language.
Senator Sears, if you could.
Wow, that is-
So this is only, this is the one-time sections, the language sections,
Yeah.
we'll be still working on getting the web report and the front of the bill.
Yeah.
oh, Senator Sears,
Yeah.
Senator Sears,
No, yeah.
the House passed bill had a lot of corrections related stuff.
Yeah.
And you're gonna pull it out and put it on another bill. I just didn't want to forget. Are you doing that?
Yeah, we have recommendations to pull most of it out.
Okay,
And so we have that from Ben, and we're trying to,
I just wanted to make sure that that didn't
didn't get
get
forgotten. And
Yeah, no, we've gone through it all and, we're leaving some in, but pulling out quite a bit.
okay. All right.
And what you see here is we've taken away everything that you've sort of struck away from the House, but anything that's new from the Senate in the green language. But what would be helpful, and not all of this is in perfect shape yet because it's timing, especially around like what we just talked about, digital list isn't in here yet. But we're working on that. But as you read through, if you have questions, if you are reading through and you are noticing something that you thought we were gonna see somewhere and you don't by the time you get near the end of this.
So what we're gonna do is just, all of us go through this.
All of you.
You're
go
not
through
gonna
the-
read to us,
I am not, I am gonna take a quick look, I think there's a couple places where I really want
Could you
input.
point to where we should really focus our attention?
Green link.
Well, green language, but anything that might be
So,
reason. Now,
so-
one thing that has come up, and we had some discussion and there's language on it, and that is, we're doing the increases to the DAs and SSAs.
and that is on,
And there was a lot of discussion around that. We've added, had conversations with relevant committee chairs.
that's on bottom of page 100, the last version that we had.
And what we know is that we have great disparity in the rates that we reimburse our mental health agencies. And the Agency of Human Services was wanting, their wish was to have the appropriation sort of not be open, and therefore they would determine how the money would go out to the agency. So we're concerned, and we started hearing, and that is that at least everyone get a floor increase. And so this is what this should do.
They get it 100.
Um,
So they get a 3%.
Everyone would get,
So you funded a 5%.
and so what we did is we broke it up into 3 and 2. Everyone would have a minimum of 3. And the agencies that have the greatest disparity in rate reimbursement, the remaining 2 would be used to fund those rate adjustments. So that is not what the agency wanted, but all the agencies felt that everyone should be assured of at least a base increase.
Well, I would hope.
So I guess you would agree, and so that's one thing that we did change, that just want to bring your attention
The
to.
agency will make those.
The 3% is a given
No,
for
the 2%.
everybody, and the 2%
How to
that would look
how
at
to
it.
read be within the 2%.
And we're just giving them the authority.
Yeah.
And you can see the remaining funds shall be used to provide payment equity. And that's the big concern. And that's at the bottom of page 100. And then they would report back. Now, there was language from, coming in today, it's just brutal. And I think, I'm not going to suggest we do it. The healthcare advocate came in on the dental and wanted to add something else over and above what we had.
What's in, I don't know if it's in yet, but did we get the where we set a floor of the cap?
Yeah.
And so it's no longer capped at the floor and it would allow.
Now, this is
dental
to
rates.
report back to the committee on 2025 on the impact of the dental. It's a nothing, I just got it this morning. I'm going to suggest we not attempt to do this. I think we could add this in conference if it makes sense.
Yeah.
Michael Fisher.
So one section where, on page 111, the emergency housing, report on emergency housing, is that what you want? That's why it's in yellow. For other yellow items for.
I just think that the hard part is DCF is not in the, they're really dependent on the whole provider network and the market to respond. So was this something that was in the House?
It was in the House. It had the crisis standards words in it, and we kind of had it on hold, and we never quite resolved what you wanted. If you wanted the whole piece taken out, if this is where we want to put the maximized Medicaid waiver.
I do think that's where we want it, and it's like, shall develop and submit a plan to coordinate and deliver. One would hope that that already is underway, and we're not planning.
We've been asking.
Yeah, so, I'm not, we really do need to see the way in which we can, and maybe the, is there an interagency housing administration? If there is, I would like to have something that comes, really is the collective work of all the people that have got to work together to make us progress, whether you're talking about Josh Hanford's group to VHCB to, every,
I believe there is a group.
if there
They've
is,
been together, I don't know if it's officially named, but they.
and I'm talking about interagency, I'm not talking about the GA work group, where we could have them come and report back. I'd like to know what we have in progress in terms of units, have we acquired anything? Progress toward the Medicaid, use of Medicaid funding to support, to help us fund the teams, the support teams, so that people can stay in their houses. Can we get a rewrite of, this doesn't really do it, we don't want more planning. We want to report back, what have you done, how much progress have we made? How are we going to make sure that Medicaid is used, who is doing it, et cetera? Yes,
Okay, I'm changing the subject because I'm reading.
All right, what page?
I'm on page 25 and I'm looking at it's the.
Before we go to that,
Okay.
would everyone agree this section needs to be?
Yes.
Okay, all right.
But you wanted that report. So you better let,
I wanted a
Yeah,
report,
we
not
need
a
to report,
plan.
but we want an action plan. We want implementation.
Well, a plan
We've
should,
been asking for this for a while.
it's actually happening now. And we've got the teams out there, they're working, et cetera. So I would like to see if we could just get a status update. And also what is the potential to use that federal funding source?
That would be a lot easier for the agency to put together.
And the reason I'm concerned about this is it continues that somehow the Department of Children and Families is the magical entity, which it's not. It's just been the pocketbook. And I don't think it's fair to just put the onus on that department. Never had the mission of creating housing. So if we could maybe get some rewrite of that and go back to page 25 and
Well,
then we go to.
Yeah, I'm on page 25 where it's in the workforce section, but it's the place where the money is being appropriated to the DAs, the SAs.
Yeah.
And I've heard that the question about the full-time equivalent assessment for the DAs and the SSAs and whether that is the right, I've heard from the organizations that this really gets in the way of the distribution.
Actually, it should expedite it because the Agency of Human Services said they don't have the staff to do it. It doesn't fit VSAC very well. They said they could try doing it. So what we were doing now is saying, let's put the money directly out to the agencies based on the number of employees they have and let them decide how they want to use the money. So it actually gives the greatest flexibility to the agencies. And so we were trying to respond to the administrative complexity of how we put the money out. So if it's,
I don't understand why they're unhappy with that.
I don't understand either.
Just raising that.
If in fact Howard has 1,000, that's one thing, and somebody else has 500, then you would allocate the 3 million, in proportion to all the agencies, and then they decide how and who they would use the money for staff, training, retention, etc.
That
So
actually seems good.
it seems like it gives then we're gonna go offline to discuss it, because I'm not taking testimony on it now. But we did get a plea, Agency of Human Services cannot administer it. We heard VSAC finds it extremely difficult because of the repayment, etc. They really don't, they can make it work, but they don't want to. So we were trying to think about the most expeditious way to get the money out to the agencies that know what they need for their staff. And this seemed to be the straightforward way. You got a pot of money, it's what for this purpose, and then you determine whether it's Howard, whether it's NKHS, Clara Martin, how you want to spend it for your staff. And it's a very simple method to do it, and everybody is getting an equal share of the $3 million. So we can talk about it at a break. But it was because of the responses that we were getting back about the complexity of administration and our past experience when we tried to. We had pots of money that never went out for year on end. And so if we want to do something quickly, how do we do it in the most expeditious way? That was the thinking behind this.
Okay.
Senator Baruch.
I have a different place if we can skip around.
All right.
So I'm looking at the PCB language we talked about yesterday, is page 48. And you remember that we suggested language because what they had was a grant up to 16 million, and this is a little better, but it still has some of that ambiguity in it. It says a grant not to exceed 16 million to reimburse, but it doesn't say we're reimbursing.
That isn't the language we agreed on.
It isn't.
No, yesterday.
You want the word total.
Jane had Senator Kitchell had a suggestion.
Yeah, I wish I could remember because I
It was-
probably wrote it down.
Not to exceed, total cost not to exceed.
You know, but
exactly.
total cost for the cost of demolition and remove shall be reimbursed an amount not to exceed 16 million.
Total.
And then related question on 49, at the end of little c there at the top, it says that these organizations will develop criteria for for eligibility under subsection B, which I believe includes the Burlington one. And I don't want it to be, we want it to be part of that. Because what we're saying is,
So you want it under B,
so in other words,
one,
they would,
A and B.
yes. And then my other question is, should that be little c at the top of 49 or should, because if you go back to
Oh,
page 47, there's little a, oh, here's little b.
Little B at the bottom.
But you want to limit what you just said to be A1 and
Right, so
A1 and,
not including large c there.
yeah, so we'll
Yeah.
make that very specific.
the other thing I'll point out is dispatch is in here. And well, we're kind of skipping around if we went through this and,
And we're gonna do, I don't think this is the updated language yet, but there's been some softening of, because the implementation would require the legislation to act on it too, so I think there's a change coming.
yeah, we're modifying that at Center Sears, and we
Yeah.
also had the request, we had 500,000, and we questioned whether that was sufficient money for the necessary work. And now it's got 2 million, it's been updated, Brady did do that,
We did that.
and that's on
Page
5.
67, line 2, the Department of State's Attorneys and Sheriffs. That should be 5 deputy state's attorneys, 3 victims advocates, and 3 legal assistants.
They can't,
They don't have enough money to do all those.
Oh, okay. Well, I was just going by Annie's.
Yeah, we looked at Annie, and Annie's, what she wanted for positions
Didn't match up with it.
exceeded what we had, it didn't match up. It
Okay,
exceeded for money.
all right. No, that's fine. I was just going by her email.
No,
And he crunched the numbers, Dick.
uh-huh.
Oh, well, I'm glad you did, sir.
So we did look at that.
And he did.
Talking about numbers, yesterday when we talked about the Lake Wise program,
Mhm.
did we leave that to go with the house's position or did we all?
so you took the house had added money. You are not adding the dollars, but the position, even though initially as proposed by the department, the position looked like it's defunding, we have the department saying they are not going to eliminate the position. And finding within their vacancy and their existing resource, they will continue the position.
And we
That's
got,
what we understood.
and we got testimony from the Commissioner of Finance and Management that they had money in their budget to fill the position. So they have the position and they have money in their budget.
Yes, and I think there's a little problem between the Commissioner of Finance and the Commissioner of the agency, and I'd like to put, is it customary to put a little language in that the position will be filled?
No, we don't usually do that.
Because
Even if you recruit, you may not be able to find any.
that's, well, if you don't want to fill a position, not very likely. I had a whole bunch of applicants, but none of them fit the bill.
I can't reconcile the funding and the statement that came from the agency versus the Commissioner of Finance and Management.
But the issue of the funding is still a difference between the House and the Senate when you get to conference.
So we've got time to reconcile this.
So you could put maybe some money in.
Well, the House put it in. Even if we didn't, we'll have to work it out. If in fact the Commissioner of Finance and Management is correct, then we don't need to put money in.
I think they are correct, but
Even if you put money in, if there's a disinclination to fill the position, it might not get filled.
That's right. So I don't think we need to deal with the money here because the House put it in
they're supposed to have.
and we're told they do have the money. So when it'll give us time to reconcile what seems to be discrepant information coming from the administration. And so I'm sure Commissioner Russian will help get that resolved.
I will help resolve it.
Just resolve it.
In my favor.
I'm just trying to
Thank
things
you.
that we did between, to try to pick up on discussion.
Can I just clarify, the Senator Sears point out 69, those positions for the state's attorney and sheriff, those was what they, the list they gave us, what they could do with the 900,000.
Well, they listed more positions than the 900,000.
Why don't this list here is the list that's too long?
No.
This is the 900,000. This is what you can do with 900.
Yes. We
Yeah.
went and
Yes,
adjusted it.
69 is just moving positions that were in the House bill.
Okay.
So
It seems like, yeah, that's why 69 seemed like there was too many.
So that it's the top of 67. That's the one we adjusted to make sure the number of positions fit within the amount of money.
And fully annualized.
What else got done? I mean, we're trying to pick up everybody's conversations and comments. We can go through, but I'm just thinking, are there other areas we want to just specifically highlight? And then we still have the transportation. So I haven't been added.
So the appropriations themselves are come out of our budget system, and the changes that the transportation, the changes to the appropriations in the transportation sections that connect to the Senate transportation bill have been embedded. We just have to generate that report and plunk it into the, and you'll get the web report as well. We'll try to get that posted tonight. We can get it fully updated. Or for, through the weekend.
And the childcare positions.
The childcare positions, you'll see, so a lot of green childcare positions in this, in the E100 section. We did not, those are because you passed S56, they now match, the list of positions now match our version of they include the leave positions, the parental leave positions.
And then 9 positions of data work.
Those are rearranged the way you agreed to.
Okay.
Yep. So there's now 4 in Dale and 5 moved to 1.
Yep, I got the split.
You've gone through that, Jim,
I'm just seeing this big thing the first time myself.
the transportation. Did you guys do that in committee? So,
All we're doing is,
is that okay?
we're just rubber stamping, Bobby.
you are, and
Well,
don't forget, there's that interplay now between the cash fund and a couple of things that we're doing in transportation. Also, that cash fund is holding the federal match for the IIJA related transportation funds. So
Yes.
this is something that it's adding to the complexity of budgeting. It's now when you're putting general fund into the capital bill, and you're putting and you're getting this nexus with transportation. I realize that the department would like to have the JTAR transfer eliminated, and that would deal with this. I would entertain elimination of the JTAR transfer and then move the responsibility for highway safety to the Department of DMV, and that they expand their highway enforcement section. I don't think they could do it for 20 million, but I would be willing to consider that, and that's what New Hampshire does. They fund their highway safety out of their T fund, out of their gas tax revenues. So there are other options of funding it. And, we can consider that in future years.
Good point.
They only do commercial, but we could, look at what would that mean. But I think that there's probably some utility about having it under an agreement with public safety. Other comments? Otherwise, I'm going to suggest we take a break and go offline. People look through this, know where we want to come back and have further discussion, and anything that needs to be corrected or added or not there. Also, the language on the moratorium on.
I read that, it looks good.
Okay.
You mean on the approved independence?
Yes.
Bill? Yeah, it's very simple, one
Yeah.
sentence.
Okay. That.
Stephanie, do you have Ben's latest memo?
Well, we do. It's not in the version that you see yet.
Okay, well, then there's no point in my looking at it. But I know what's in it. I what the Judiciary Committee fully supports those
Okay.
changes.
Page
Okay.
120.
If you,
So what I'm gonna do is, take a break and we'll go offline. We'll open the door, but the committee can just sit and start going through this language and make notations. And then we'll come back live and discuss anything that needs to be
do you want to set
added.
do you want to set a time for that?
I would like to say that we come back at 3:45.